Things evolve, Carmen, and unfortunately, you haven't. We'll be moving forward without you.
I didn't say anything. I just nodded, walked out, and tried to breathe. Maybe she was right. Maybe I hadn't evolved. But the truth, I wasn't looking to climb the ladder. I just wanted my work to speak for itself. That's what I told myself. At least, most days. It was true. I liked being the quiet one in the back, the person who spotted things others missed. I didn't crave recognition, I craved clarity. Logic, answers. That's what data gave me. It didn't care what you wore or how you said it. If the numbers worked, they worked. But the office wasn't built on logic alone. Swift Logic Technologies, where I'd worked for the past 12 years, had morphed from a scrappy analytics firm into a full-fledged corporate entity. With that came politics. And with politics came people like Tracy Caldwell. She was sharp, no doubt about that. But her real talent wasn't in data. It was in the boardroom. She knew how to command a room, how to nod an agreement at the right moment, how to take a half-formed idea and pitch it like it was gold. And she had the CEO wrapped around her perfectly manicured finger by week 3. I'd been there longer than most. I was the one who trained the interns, reviewed code late at night, and fixed broken dashboards while others slept. I never expected to be celebrated for it. But I did expect honesty. That, more than anything, is what I couldn't forgive when it was violated. The year-end strategy review was coming up, a high-stakes meeting with the executive board, where each department presented their vision for the coming year. My assignment, develop a behavioral forecast using our client retention data from the past 4 quarters. It wasn't flashy, but it was critical, and I poured everything I had into it. For nearly 2 weeks, I lived inside that dataset. At night, I'd set up in my favorite corner booth at Bean & Logic across the street. The baristas knew my name, my order, and the fact that I liked my coffee black and my workspace quiet. I'd sit there until closing, lost in formulas and model accuracy scores. When I finally packed up, Boston was asleep and the snow had begun to fall. One afternoon, Tracy stopped by my cubicle. She was holding a new holiday-themed latte peppermint something and wearing that bright red blazer she knew turned heads. "Carmen," she said, "heard you're heading up the client behavior project for the strategy review." I nodded, still typing. "You're the best we've got." She continued, "Seriously, your insights are phenomenal. I'd love to help shape how we present it. Maybe coach you a bit, get the messaging tight. You know Howard loves a good story." I glanced up. Her tone was light, casual, friendly. "I appreciate that," I said cautiously. "Great," she said, already moving on. "Send me the deck once it's ready, and we'll polish it together." I should have known. When the deck was finished, I sent her the file. It was clean, concise, and built around a solid regression model that showed seasonal behavior shifts tied to marketing campaigns. It wasn't flashy, but it told the truth, and that's what I believed mattered. 2 days later, Tracy scheduled a coaching session. She breezed in late, skimmed the slides while checking her phone, and offered a few superficial edits. "Let's make this title pop more," she said. "Also, maybe we change the color scheme. Howard hates blue on white." I nodded and took notes. She tapped her screen a few times, then stood. "You're doing great. I'll finalize the slides and submit to corporate so they can add it to the master deck." It was framed as a courtesy, as if she were doing me a favor. That night, I got a notification from the internal system. Final presenters listed for each department, under data strategy. It read, "Tracy Caldwell," no mention of me. I stared at the screen, rereading the line like it would change. I scrolled back through my emails, looking for anything I'd missed. I hadn't. There was no note, no heads up, just an assumption that Tracy would speak for both of us. I waited until the next day to say something. Over lunch, I approached her in the break room. "Hey, saw the agenda. Just wondering, should I be prepping notes too? Or are we tag teaming?" She didn't even blink. "Oh, that," she said, tearing open a protein bar. "Yeah, I figured I'd just do it solo. Cleaner that way. You know how it is. Too many voices muddle the message. I didn't know how it was, or maybe I did, and I just didn't want to admit it. But don't worry," she added, flashing a rehearsed smile. "I'll totally shout you out. I'll make sure they know you did the groundwork." Shout me out, like I was a footnote. Back at my desk, I opened the original deck again. Then I opened a new file, and I began copying slides, some identical, some tweaked. On the surface, it looked the same, but within the regression model, I made subtle changes. I added a few data points that hadn't been verified. I included one incomplete graph, visually similar but meaningless without context. Nothing that would crash the presentation, but enough that anyone unfamiliar with the logic behind it would stumble. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't complain to HR. I didn't fire off an angry email. I didn't confront Tracy. Instead, I waited. because I'd spent my entire career backing other people up, making sure they looked good, covering their blind spots. But this time, I wasn't going to clean up the mess. When Tracy asked for my slides, I didn't think twice I should have. The following Monday, I walked into the office early, hoping for a quiet start to a tense week. The executive strategy review was just days away, and you could feel the pressure radiating from every cubicle. People were dressing sharper, speaking faster, pretending to look busy even when they weren't. This meeting wasn't just another box to tick, it was where careers shifted, where you impressed the C-suite, or you disappeared for another year. I had my morning routine down to the second. Coat off, badge tap, laptop open, coffee from the kitchen black, 1 sugar. As I waited by the drip machine, I heard my name, not shouted, but murmured. She did all that work, and Tracy's the one presenting. It was Stacy, one of our newer analysts, whispering to someone over by the copier. I mean, Carmen's the only one who even understands that model. I didn't respond. I just stirred my coffee and walked away. My desk was exactly as I left it Friday, neat, methodical, unlike the chaos that had bloomed in my inbox overnight. Meeting agendas, slide reviews, memos, and then one email that made my stomach drop. Subject, final deck. Approved for CEO review. From Project Management Office. To all department heads. I opened the attachment. It was the official strategy presentation, merged and compiled. Every department had its 10-slide block. And under data strategy, Tracy's name, alone, her smiling face sat at the top right corner of the title slide. Beneath the heading, Predictive Client Retention. A new era. A small part of me hoped I'd at least see my name in the notes section. I clicked. Nothing, not even initials. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a long minute. It wasn't just about credit, it was about truth. I had done the work not as a favor, not as a placeholder, but because it mattered. And now, someone was going to stand in front of the CEO and take ownership of ideas she didn't understand. I knew how Tracy worked. She would read the notes, memorize the high-level bullets, breeze through it like it was her own. And most of the time, that was enough. People rarely question confidence, but I also knew something else. If she were asked a single detailed question, just one, she'd crumble. Because this time, the content was more than just buzzwords. The real meaning lived in the formulas, the forecast parameters, the logic hidden beneath the slides. Around 10 of May, Tracy strutted by with a coffee in hand and a red folder tucked under her arm. She spotted me and smiled. "You good for Friday?" she asked. I blinked. "Am I presenting anything?" She laughed. No, I mean, just being there. I might need you to pull up the original data files if they ask." I nodded slowly. "Sure, I'll be ready." "Oh, and can you resend the final deck to me?" she added. "I want to make sure the version I have is clean." Clean. There it was again, her way of phrasing things that always implied she was doing me a favor. "Of course," I said. "I'll send it right now." She walked off. I turned back to my screen. The file she wanted was already waiting. The final deck, the one I had sent her before, with the half-complete chart, the placeholder regression note, and one slide titled TBD, Segment Analysis, Awaiting Model Confirmation, and I hit send. I watched the progress bar crawl across the screen like a slow exhale. When it turned green, I sat back. My heart wasn't racing. There was no adrenaline, just quiet. By Wednesday, the building was buzzing. People were triple-checking their talking points, nervously laughing too loud in the elevator, practicing jargon in the hallway. I watched it all from behind my screen, typing up documentation like I always did. Stacy stopped by mid-afternoon. "Hey," she said quietly, leaning on the divider between our desks. "Did you want me to sit in on the review Friday? I know you built most of that deck." I hesitated, then shrugged. "That's up to Tracy." She bit her lip. "Right." And then she added, "For what it's worth, everyone knows it was your work." It was kind, but it didn't help. Not yet. Thursday afternoon, just before I shut down for the day, I checked my email one last time. A new invite had come through. Subject, Executive Strategy Review, Final Agenda. Location, 9th floor conference room. Time, Friday, 8:30. Main. I opened the attachment. Under Data Strategy Presentation. Only one name. Presenter. Tracy Caldwell. I closed the laptop without reading the rest. That night, I didn't go home. Not right away. I went to Bean and Logic, ordered my usual, and took the seat by the window. Snow was falling again, light and slow, painting Boston in soft white. Across the street, the office building glowed with holiday lights and false warmth. I opened my personal laptop, loaded the original deck, the one only I had access to, and saved it under a new name. Client retention reel final. PPTX. I polished the visuals, fixed the unfinished models, restored the notes I had scrubbed from Tracy's version, and then I added something new. One slide at the end, a backup slide, titled simply, Clarification Slide. Regression, coefficient rationale. The kind of thing only someone who actually built the model could explain, just in case someone asked the right question, just in case I got the chance. She stole my work. I didn't get angry, I got strategic. By the time Friday morning rolled around, I was ready, calm, precise, and more focused than I had been in years. I woke up before my alarm, brewed my own coffee for once instead of grabbing it on the way in, and stood in front of my closet a little longer than usual. Most days I dressed in quiet colors, soft grays, navy, the occasional deep burgundy when I felt brave. Today, I chose cream, a soft cashmere turtleneck I'd almost forgotten I owned, and my cleanest tailored pants. It wasn't about vanity. It was about intention. By 7:45, I was seated in the 9th floor conference room, 2 rows of leather chairs, a polished walnut table, and a massive screen already displaying the opening slide of the agenda. My laptop rested on my knees, my personal one, not the company-issued brick. People trickled in slowly. I saw Howard Leland enter last, flanked by his assistant and one of the VPs. He gave a short nod to the room and took his place at the head of the table. His presence always shifted the energy, quiet authority, without needing to raise his voice. At 8:31, Tracy walked in. She was glowing, confident, in a cobalt blue blazer and those black suede heels she wore for power days. She greeted the CEO with a firm handshake, flashed a warm smile at the room, and then turned to me. "Can you load the deck?" she asked under her breath, passing me a flash drive. I nodded and took it from her. What she didn't realize was that I'd already pulled up her version sent to me earlier in the week and mirrored it to the room's main screen. It looked perfect. It was familiar. It was also wrong. Not wrong in a way that would crash and burn, but wrong in a way that would raise questions, require clarity, demand understanding. Tracy took center stage and began with practiced ease. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Tracy Caldwell, and today I am excited to walk you through our client retention forecasts for Q1 through Q4 of the coming fiscal year." She was good. I'll give her that. She had the cadence down, the eye contact, the voice modulation. She hit every buzzword from behavioral segmentation to predictive lift without stumbling. Anyone not paying attention would have assumed she built it herself. But Howard was paying attention, and so was I. By slide 5, we were deep into the model assumptions. That's when it started. So here, we used a multivariable regression that factored seasonality, churn rates, and engagement scores to generate our retention likelihood indexes. She paused. Howard leaned forward slightly. "Can you walk us through how you adjusted for the Q2 anomalies?" he asked. Specifically, the engagement skew tied to that outlier campaign. Tracy blinked. "Of course," she said. "Buying time. We, accounted for that in the input layer. The coefficients were normalized based on what baseline?" He pressed. I saw it. The slight stiffening in her shoulders, the tightening of her smile. I didn't move. She turned toward me briefly. "We used Carmen's raw pull as the base." "Right," she said, addressing the room. Howard's eyes shifted to me. "Carmen," he said, not unkindly, but directly. I cleared my throat. "If I may," I said. The baseline wasn't from the raw pull. It was recalibrated using a weighted average from our year-over-year engagement index. The initial draft had a standard coefficient, but I revised it once I factored in the marketing anomaly. That version isn't in this deck. Howard nodded slowly. "I see. Do you have the revised version with you?" I glanced at Tracy. Her face was frozen. I think for the first time in her entire career, she didn't know what to say. I opened my laptop. "Yes," I replied, and mirrored my screen to the projector. A different slide appeared, visually similar, but more layered. The colors were sharper, the notes more detailed, the logic sound. It was unmistakably the work of someone who had built it line by line. There was a long pause in the room, and then Howard smiled, just barely. "Please continue." I did. I walked them through the revised model, explained the Q2 anomaly correction, demonstrated how the churn cluster behaved differently under dynamic segmentation. I used plain English, not jargon. I spoke like someone who had lived inside the numbers, and I had. At some point, I stopped noticing Tracy sitting behind me. I didn't need to look. I could feel the silence. I wrapped the presentation with a short recommendation slide and a projection curve based on our adjusted inputs. It ended with a clean forecast, confident, defensible, real. Howard leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Well done," he said. "This is exactly the level of rigor we need going into Q1. No applause. Just words, but from Howard. They meant everything. As I unplugged my laptop, I looked over my shoulder. Tracy was staring at the table. The moment I took over the screen, the room fell silent. It wasn't dramatic. No gasps, no shifting in chairs, just that subtle shift in air pressure that happens when a room collectively holds its breath. I could hear the faint hum of the ceiling projector and the muted clack of someone nervously clicking their pen. Even Tracy, always composed, hesitated, her polished fingertips frozen mid-gesture over her iPad. On the big monitor, my version of the deck loaded. The formatting was precise, with color-coded segments and a title line in understated navy. Client retention forecast. Revised final roads. It wasn't ego. I added my name for clarity. For once, there would be no mistaking where this analysis came from. I stood with calm hands and steady voice. This version includes adjusted retention curves and anomaly correction logic that weren't present in the previous model. I glanced around the room. No one interrupted. Howard leaned forward, elbows on the polished wood. His expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. "Walk us through the changes," he said. So I did, slide by slide. I took them through the logic. I pointed out the baseline recalibration in Q2, explained the dynamic segmentation applied to the churn clusters, and laid out the rationale behind adjusting our seasonality weights. This wasn't storytelling with buzzwords. This was data, talking plainly. Tracy remained seated off to the side, watching. I could feel her discomfort rise with every sentence. I didn't look at her, but I could hear the way she shifted in her seat, how she stopped tapping her stylus, how she crossed and uncrossed her legs twice in the span of 30 seconds. The confident rhythm she'd walked in with was gone. "Here," I said, pulling up the corrected visualization, "is the actual retention decay curve when we isolate by engagement cohort and eliminate the outlier from campaign 6B. Rhonda, a VP from product, squinted at the chart. Wait, wasn't that spike in Q2 considered organic growth? I shook my head. No, we traced it back to a temporary promotion. Customer engagement was artificially high, but 72% of that cohort didn't convert to repeat usage. If we had used that data without adjusting, it would have overinflated our Q3 forecast. She nodded slowly. That makes sense. Thank you. Howard was still watching me, not Tracy. Me. What about churn modeling? He asked. Did you rerun it against last year's unstructured feedback? I did, I replied. It's in the appendix. Sentiment analysis flagged an emerging theme around onboarding confusion. We're factoring that into the regression in the next round. I clicked forward. The final slide was quiet and simple. A clean forecast chart with margins of error outlined, along with a note that read, model accuracy validated at 96.2% over trailing 12 months. That was my real win. Quiet accuracy. Howard sat back in his chair and looked around the room. Excellent, he said. Truly well done. I exhaled slowly. Then, without even a pause, he turned toward Tracy. Do you have anything you'd like to add? Tracy opened her mouth, closed it, then smiled tight, controlled. I'd just echo Carmen's points, she said, her voice lower than usual. Her technical contribution to this work was instrumental. I think this presentation speaks for itself. Howard didn't nod, didn't smile, just turned back to me. Carmen, I want you to walk the product and marketing teams through this next week. Let's begin incorporating this logic into Q1 planning immediately. Happy to, I said. And one more thing, he paused, tapping a pen slowly on the table. Let's set time in January. I want to talk about your trajectory here. Trajectory. It wasn't a word he threw around lightly. And just like that, the tone of the room changed. I wasn't just a support analyst anymore. I was someone with gravity, someone they were looking to now not for backup, but for leadership. The meeting wrapped a few minutes later. People stood, shook hands, gathered their things. I stayed seated, letting the adrenaline drain out of me in slow waves. Eric walked past and clapped me on the shoulder, murmuring solid job, with the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in months. Tracy remained seated too. She was slowly placing her pen and notepad back into her designer leather tote. Her movements were deliberate, too deliberate. Her face was blank, but I saw the tightness in her jaw. She didn't meet my eyes. And I didn't need her to. The truth had already spoken. There was no need for confrontation, no raised voices, no fireworks, just the slow, undeniable realization that she had built her performance on a foundation she didn't understand. And when asked to explain it, she crumbled. As I stood to leave, Howard nodded at me one more time, not as a courtesy, but as recognition. In that moment, I felt more visible than I had in over a decade, and I hadn't needed to shout, accuse, or retaliate. I had simply let the numbers speak, and this time, they spoke in my voice. It wasn't revenge, it was recognition. That phrase ran through my mind like a quiet refrain as I walked back to my desk. The halls of Swift Logic, usually filled with the tap of hurried footsteps and half-formed conversations, now felt strangely respectful. People didn't exactly stop and clap. That wasn't our culture. But they looked, they nodded, they offered brief, knowing glances that said, "We saw what happened, and more importantly, we understand now." At my desk, I sat down slowly, letting the weight of the moment settle. I didn't feel giddy. There was no internal drum roll or cinematic swelling of music. What I felt was steadier than that, like a weight I'd carried for years, had quietly slipped off my shoulders. 10 minutes later, an email from Howard's assistant popped up. Subject, one-on-one scheduling. When? January 10th, 9:30 a.m. Where? CEO office, 10th floor. Message. Howard would like to discuss your goals for 2020 and beyond. I stared at it for a while. It didn't feel real. I hit accept. A few moments later, a second ping from HR landed in my inbox. Subject, internal role adjustment. 2. Carmen Rhodes, CC, department heads, HR operations, effective January 3rd, 2025. Tracy Caldwell will transition into the role of strategic support advisor within the client experience division. All inquiries relating to data strategy should be directed to Carmen Rhodes until a permanent replacement is announced. My eyes scanned it again. There it was, in corporate language. The fall. They hadn't called it a demotion. Of course not. Swift Logic didn't do public shame, but anyone who had been here more than 6 months knew what client experience support really meant. It was the professional equivalent of being put on the bench, a holding pattern, quiet exile. And yet, I didn't feel triumphant. There was no desire to gloat, no lingering anger left to feed on. Only one clear thought pulsed in the back of my mind. I didn't need to destroy her to elevate myself. At noon, I walked to Bean in Logic, not for caffeine, but for space. For the first time in months, I ordered something other than coffee, a turkey sandwich, warm tomato soup. I sat in my usual booth by the window. Outside, Boston was slushy from melting snow, but the city still glowed under soft winter light. The streets felt slower. Maybe it was the post-holiday lull. Or maybe, for once, I was the one who had slowed down. Halfway through my sandwich, a familiar voice appeared beside me. "You have room for one more." It was Eric, holding a black coffee and a notepad. I gestured to the seat. "Sure." He sat without ceremony, glancing out the window before finally speaking. "You handled that meeting like a pro." I gave a soft shrug. "I just told the truth." "Yeah, but you told it the right way." He looked at me, really looked. That's not easy. For a moment, we both just listened to the cafe hum, steam hissing from the espresso machine. Someone laughing 3 tables over, silverware clinking. Then Eric leaned in slightly and said, "Most people would have gone scorched earth. You could have dragged her through the mud. I didn't want that." I said, "She did what she did." But the work spoke louder. He nodded. It did, loud and clear. We sat for a few more minutes in comfortable silence. When he finally stood to leave, he said, "I'm glad they finally see what the rest of us already knew." It stayed with me. That afternoon, when I returned to my desk, I found a yellow sticky note on my monitor. The handwriting was small, a little slanted. "Thank you for saying what I couldn't." Stacy. I didn't need to guess. She'd been watching. She'd seen it unfold in the small ways, the subtle shifts in who got credit and who got overlooked. And like so many others, she probably stayed quiet because that's what you do when you're new. When you're not sure your voice will be heard. I smiled and tucked the note into the back of my notebook. Around 3:00 p. May, I got a Teams message from someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly a year, Tasha, a former lead who had quietly left after feeling sidelined by the same politics that nearly buried me. "Saw what happened today. Just wanted to say, about damn time." I typed back, "Appreciate that. Hope you're well." She replied with a single thumbs up. That was enough. As the day wound down, I began wrapping up for the long weekend. The office was already half empty. Holiday schedules, unused PTO, people pretending to work from home. I stayed behind, closing tabs and straightening files. It felt like something was ending. Not the week, not the year, but an old version of me, one who waited, one who gave away credit, one who kept her head down, hoping someone might notice. That version of me was gone. Right as I was shutting down my laptop, a notification popped up. New meeting request, Q1, strategic planning, kickoff. Host, CEO office. Participants, Howard, Rhonda, Carmen Rhodes. There was no mention of Tracy. I accepted. I didn't say a word when Tracy left, but the room did. She didn't make a speech. No farewell lunch. No card discreetly passed from desk to desk. Just one crisp email to the entire department that landed in inboxes like an afterthought. Subject: farewell, thank you, all, from Tracy Caldwell. 2. Data strategy. All team members. As I move into a new chapter within Swift Logic, I want to thank each of you for the collaboration, insight, and shared successes we've built together. I have learned so much from this team and wish everyone continued growth in 2025. Stay brilliant. There were no mentions of names, no appreciation for teamwork, not even a hint of what the new chapter entailed, just a statement that said as little as possible while still appearing polished. But around the office, everyone understood what it really meant. Tracy wasn't ascending, she wasn't transitioning upward, she was being eased out of sight, redirected to a role that sounded strategic but had no seat at the main table. It was the corporate version of being asked to step aside with grace. I watched from my desk as she packed up her belongings into a single cardboard box. Her movements were smooth, deliberate, not rushed, not sloppy. The performance of composure, her red lipstick still flawless, her blazer sharp, her posture dignified. But her eyes, they never looked up. Not once. No one approached her. Even those who had once hung on her every word suddenly had meetings to prepare for, calls to take, emails to check. It was as though her presence had quietly expired. When she passed my desk on her way to the elevator, we locked eyes. Just for a moment, I nodded, not mockingly, not smugly, just respectfully, quietly. To my surprise, she returned the nod, nothing more. The elevator doors closed, and she was gone. I returned my focus to the work in front of me, but even that felt different now. The same spreadsheets, dashboards, and project deadlines sat in my to-do list, but the context had changed. I was no longer operating in Tracy's shadow. The spotlight had shifted, but I didn't chase it. It simply landed on me because I had earned it. That afternoon, I stepped into the conference room on the 10th floor for the Q1 planning session. My name was on the agenda, not as a contributor, not as a note-taker, but as strategic lead for the data forecasting segment. Howard opened the meeting with his usual directness. Thanks for joining today. Carmen will be leading us through the modeling framework that will shape our Q1 and Q2 campaign decisions. She's earned the room. That last line echoed longer than the rest. She's earned the room. I stood up, took my place at the head of the table, and launched into the model. No shaky hands, no self-doubt. I explained the logic, fielded questions, challenged assumptions. The conversation was sharp but collaborative. People listened not because I raised my voice, but because what I said mattered. And when the meeting wrapped, no one second-guessed my role. It was mine now. Afterward, I walked past the glass wall of the conference room and noticed how the daylight had softened. The snow had picked up again outside, thick flakes floating sideways in that gentle, dreamy way only December snow could. Most of the team had already begun trickling out for the holiday break. People wrapped up calls, powered down laptops, and wished each other safe travels. Laughter echoed near the kitchen, where someone had brought in cookies, and the scent of cinnamon drifted into the hallway. I stayed behind. I wasn't in a rush. Back at my desk, I took a few moments to clear old folders from my drive. Among them, I found a document labeled at Final Deck V5 Tracy Lead, PP. I moved it to the archive folder, hovered my mouse over the delete button, then decided to leave it, not as a grudge, as a reminder of what almost happened and what I had chosen instead. I turned to the window. From 9 stories up, Boston looked like a postcard light spilling onto sidewalks, bundled pedestrians moving like shadows below. Snowflakes gathered on the outer glass pane like quiet punctuation. As I stood there, Stacy walked by, coat in hand. "You're still here?" she asked. I smiled. Finishing up. She paused. "You changed everything last week." Everyone felt it. I didn't reply right away. I didn't need to. Then I said softly, "You'll do it one day too. Just don't wait for permission." She smiled like she believed me and walked off into the snow. The office dimmed as the last of the overhead lights clicked off. I sat back down one more time, opened a new folder, and labeled it 2025, Strategic Leadership. Then I typed one line into a blank document. Start strong, stay quiet, be undeniable. When I finally stepped outside into the cold, the city wrapped itself around me like an old friend. I walked slowly, feeling the crunch of fresh snow beneath my boots, the street lamps casting soft halos in the quiet night. I didn't feel invisible anymore. I didn't feel like someone waiting to be seen. I was someone who had spoken through action, through patience, through sheer, relentless clarity. And this time, I wasn't just part of the team. I was leading it. You don't need a title to lead, and you don't need applause to matter. Real impact doesn't come from taking credit. It comes from doing work no one else can replace. In a room full of voices, the quiet one holding the truth will always outlast the noise. Let others race ahead for the spotlight. If you're building something solid, your time will come, and when it does, it won't be luck, it'll be proof. So keep showing up, keep doing it right. One day, they won't just notice you, they'll rely on you, and they'll wonder why they didn't sooner.